My name is Jerry Barron. I'm with the Rutgers University. I'm Executive Director of the IRF4 program. Just a very brief background on myself. I'm a production horticulturist. Received my PhD in horticulture from North Carolina State University and my Master's of Science also in horticulture from the Ohio State University. So I've been working in horticulture, but horticulture pest management. So I'm speaking today, the title is Pesticides Risk in Feeding 10 Billion People, but I'm really going to be talking a little bit about food waste and some of the things that we have coming on in our next few years that are, in my mind, very, very scary. And for me, it's a opportunity to share some thoughts with you and hopefully get you and others motivated to do something about what I consider a train wreck. So I'm going to just start, give you some background information about my program, and hopefully by the end of this talk it'll all wrap in together and you'll see where I'm going. But we're going to start with the benefits of pest management. The cabbage plant on the upper left, you would not see that in this show over here. I don't think any of the salespeople would want to bring a cabbage plant of that magnitude into this show. Even worse yet, you would not see anything like that in a grocery store. What you would see here and what you would see at the retail market is that cabbage on the bottom right-hand side. A very lush cabbage, bright color. And one of the reasons why that looks the way it does is because of pest management. And the pests are out there. They're going to attack that crop. And many cases, you have to do something about it or you're going to get that holy cabbage. In the United States and many parts of the world, one of the ways that we have been managing pests is by the spraying of crop protection products on the crops. And this is just a picture of a sprayer spraying, I don't know, it's either a chemical pesticide or a biopesticide on a field of lettuce. That's the way we've been predominantly doing it for the last 70 years or so. But this does lead to one issue, and we call it the minor use problem, and that is these products, these crop protection products, are predominantly developed by companies such as Bayer, BASF, Syngenta, Dow, DuPont, major chemical companies, and many of these companies focus their efforts on large acreage crops that give them a very rapid return on investment. And the fruits and vegetables that you see here at the show, they are oftentimes very small acreage, and the companies don't go after that market. That has led to the minor use problem, which means is the farmers of these small acreage crops don't have access, do not have legal access to these effective crop protection chemicals. The U.S. Department of Agriculture in 1963 established the IRF4 project as a solution to this minor use problem. That's our old logo there. It just shows some of the partners in there. I won't go into that one, but it's a multi-part of the government, commodity groups, different parts of the government, EPA, the states, the agriculture, chemical industry, growers. They're all partners in this process. But the whole idea was that this program would be out there to help farmers get legal access to these products. Just very briefly, the mission of the IRF4 project is to facilitate the regulatory approval of sustainable pest management technologies for specialty crops and specialty uses to promote public well-being. Same mission that we started in 1963, few more buzzwords, but it's predominantly the same program today than it was 53 years ago. Just very briefly, some of the program objectives. There's 4 main objectives. The crops program. In here, this part of the program will conduct magnitude of the residue studies to show that how much pesticide or biopesticide remains on the crop at harvest. So for example, if a farmer has a need to control a pest, they'll come to us. We will do a study to determine how much of that product will still be on the crop at harvest We work very closely with the Environmental Protection Agency. We'll submit that data to the Environmental Protection Agency. They'll conduct a risk assessment. If the product does not exceed risk standards, EPA will allow registration. Then the farmer can use it and then produce some beautiful looking produce. If the risk equation is off kilter, then EPA says no go and end of story. Our other areas under the food crop program is doing some efficacy and product performance testing to take care of liability concerns that the farmers may have or the companies may have. And then probably the bigger issue that's becoming incredibly complex and incredibly relevant is the international harmonization of pesticide regulations and pesticide registrations. I'll get into this a little bit more, but oftentimes, I'll just give you a precursor, oftentimes a farmer will not know where that produce that they're growing is going to end up. Is it going to end up in the European Union? Is it going to end up in Asian Rim? Or is it going to end up domestically? And the products they use are dictated by where that product ends up or will it end up. And they can't segregate these crops out. So what's happening is the growers can oftentimes have to use what is registered in multiple parts of the world. And sometimes what's registered in other parts of the world are not the best products. They have higher risks, so on and so forth. So we're trying to harmonize this and give U.S. growers more export opportunities, as well as give other international growers an opportunity to bring into here as well. Our second objective is biopesticides for the organic industry. It is a misnomer that the general public often forgets, but pesticides are used on organic crops. If there's one thing you can take home from this message today, that organic crops are not pesticide free. There are different types of pesticides, but they are used on organic crops. The third program is ornamental crops, getting clearances for there. Won't spend much time on that one. And the final one is public health pests. And right now, with the Zika virus, this has become very relevant. We're trying to do is to develop new technologies to manage Zika virus or manage mosquitoes which transmit the Zika virus to prevent that from spreading. And I won't go into any depth, but I'll just say it's a very scary situation. Just to wrap a few things up about the IRF4, we did a benefits analysis, and we just looked at who benefits from this government investment. Growers and farmers have legal access to safe and effective pest management technologies, allows them to grow high quality crops. Food processors and food retailers have a consistent supply of raw materials. Let me just add on that one. Right now in Florida, there's a major crisis in the citrus industry. You may have heard of the citrus greening issue. Not only is that hurting the citrus farmers because they can't produce crops, but whole communities' economics are going downhill. There's just not enough raw material to feed the citrus processing plants, the juicing plants. And juicing plants are having to be shut down. And as these plants shut down because not having the raw materials, jobs are being lost. And it just steamrolls within the whole community there. It's a very scary situation. And it's all because you can't control a particular pest on citrus. So it's very critical that, that for food processors, that they have a consistent supply chain of quality raw material. And obviously the supermarkets feel the same way about that one. The public benefits, they have a plentiful supply of fruits and vegetables that obviously contribute to a healthy diet. And let's not forget that plants and flowers enhance the environment that we live in. And finally, we did a economic assessment a few years back, and the number that came out is through the efforts of the IRF4 program, we add $7.2 billion annually to the gross domestic product. $7.2 billion annually. This supports over 100,000 jobs. So it's not really insignificant, even though the crops that we work on are often called minor. So over the past 50 years, we've developed 40,000 specialty crop minor use registrations of both chemical and biopesticides. So it's helped the industry. And I'll just wrap this up, this introduction about IRF4. We take very seriously stakeholder input. And these are just some of the stakeholders that are involved in the IRF4 program in providing oversight. You know, some of them here are actually out here on the show floor, having booths here. Others are well known in the industry, such as Western Growers, American Farm Bureau. But I just want to read you one quick quote. Let me see if I have it here. Just to put this in perspective, this was a quote by Bob Simmerly from McCain Foods. And I quote, "Anyone who eats or has an interest in the IRF4 project, whether they know it or not, the IRF4 project is a vital part of our country's food security system and should be considered a national strategic initiative." I couldn't say it better myself, but you know, it's very, you know, we have, from the production side, we have a lot of strong support by the people that grow these crops. So let me move ahead into really what I came here to talk about, which is really some of the grand challenges we have ahead. And please don't take this lightly, but we have a train wreck coming. Fair and simple, there is a train wreck coming, and let me explain. Excuse the fuzziness of this slide, but by the year 2050, there'll be 10 billion mouths to feed on the face of the earth. That's 10, T-E-N, billion. Right now, or 2011, 5 years ago, that was 7 billion. And you can see how quickly this growth is extrapolating, how quickly we're getting more and more people. So it's scary. But really the grand challenge is, where are we going to find enough people or enough food to feed these 9 billion people? We're going to find enough food. It's a daunting task. Most of us, and I'm going to go out on a limb here, but I don't think I'm going out on the limb too far. Most of us here in this little noisy little corner of the trade show have never had a situation where you've had money in your pocketbook, your wallet, whatever, or a credit card, and you've gone into a store for any extended time and haven't been able to find food. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm going to go on a limb and say that we've all been very fortunate that we've all been able to, you know, get money. Now, you know, you can walk outside this show on the streets of New York, and there are a lot of hungry people there, and that's a distribution issue. It's a distribution of wealth issue, but if you have money, you can find food. That's not, in other parts of the world, that's not the same story. And what's scary about it is, you know, when we're at 7 billion people in there, it's a challenge. But when you add 3 billion more people, it's going to become a much, much larger challenge. And let me just remind you, this issue will impact everyone, from the farmer to the consumer and everyone in between. I don't think anyone is going to be immune to this issue. Now, you know, right now we're relatively immune to it because we're seeing plenty, but it's not going to be as simple, you know, going forth in the future. So what is the answer? What is the hope? I crossed out answer because I'm not certain it's the full answer, but what is, you know, a common thread? Well, one is to grow more food. You know, grow more and we can feed more. And the second is to reduce food waste. Well, it's simple, you know, we'll just grow more food, but guess what? The land area that we have to grow food is shrinking. It's shrinking all the time. Farms are being taken out, made into developments. Other areas are being developed. these 3 billion more people are going to have places to live. So, you know, that means for each individual piece of land, we're going to have to be more productive for it to happen. Of course, you know, the other answer is to reduce food waste. So let me go into each one of those a little bit more. So one of the thoughts of increased our yield of food in recognizing that the land area may be reduced is to allow technology to help us achieve these yield gains. And you know, there's technology out there. I'm a scientist. I'm a scientist at a major research university. And I can tell you there's a bunch of great science coming out. And every time you look, there's something new and innovative coming out there. And it's very hard to keep up with all the new things that are coming out. But unfortunately, the general public is not always acceptance of this technology. There's, in a lot of cases, an automatic pushback of this technology before it even has a chance to be proven to be safe. I threw these two pictures up there. They're common pictures. One is a pushback against genetically modified crops, and then one is pushback of toxic apples. You know, I find the whole thing about genetically modified crops, and I know I'm probably skating on thin ice when I go down this pathway, but you know, walking through the trade show, I saw, you know, certain booths there, you know, non-GMO. Well, yeah, they're non-GMO because the GMO technology isn't in that crop. So there's no way they're going to be GMO. So you know, it's playing on people's fears. It really is, it's sad, but you know, there are groups that are playing on people's fears that, you know, genetically modified crops are going to, you know, have you grow a third eye, or if you eat that toxic apple, you know, your one of your appendages are going to fall off. You know, science, and I know it's sometimes hard to fight science emotion, but you know, the plain fact of the matter is pesticides and crop protection technology goes through more testing than pharmaceuticals. We'll just leave it at that. But going along the lines, I just really want to relay to you an old Chinese proverb. A man who has bread has many problems, but a man who has none has but one. And think about that for a second. It's basically saying is if you can have food there, and life is good and there's plenty there, you can have a lot of worries about a lot of different things, and maybe those worries aren't all that bad. But if you are searching for that food, that's your number one goal. And it really just leads to, you know, the science versus emotions. And it's hard for a science base to go say, well, you know, believe me, trust me, you know, I'm a credible science. I recognize that one. It's very hard to argue the case of science on Facebook because it's very difficult for someone to prove a negative. You can't, it's virtually impossible to prove a negative. And that leads to what is unfortunately some rash decisions that may be counterproductive of where people really want to be going. I'm going to give you a case in point. So I got my little happy bee here, okay, and he's happy because he's out buzzing around. But has everyone heard about some of the controversy going on with bees now? Okay, I mean, you look at all the crops out here, many of these crops that are on this trade show floor are dependent, 100% dependent on bees to pollinate them. And without Mr. Happy Bee there, we wouldn't have this produce there, and it just wouldn't happen. So what's happened was that it had been suggested that a class of insecticides called the neonicotinoids were hurting bees because we were having this massive situation called colony collapse disorder where bees were disappearing. and was becoming very frightening that bees were disappearing, and lo and behold, nothing was there. So people started getting very concerned because, God forbid, if we lose these bees, we wouldn't have these crops. So it became very much, and the government was pressured to do something. So let's take a step backwards for a second. And has any of you ever taken a toxicology class in college? Just raise your hand if you did. Mary, I know you, no? Okay. Well, in toxicology, and it's not hard science, this is out of your toxicology class 101, it's a risk equation. And risk equals to hazard time exposure. So because a lot of you haven't taken toxicology, let me go into it and maybe explain it in a different manner, maybe something that's a little bit more easier to understand versus pest management. So let's talk about carbon monoxide, okay? Carbon monoxide is a odorless gas that when you drive a car, burn gasoline, diesel fuel, it releases this gas and it can kill you. In fact, last year there were over 500 unintentional deaths. Now I say unintentionally because there was more deaths from carbon monoxide, but those were people committing suicide. Shut their garage door, turn their car on, good night, you pass out before you die. And so it was much more than 500, but 500 deaths occurred just from unintentional uses. Produced by cars, heaters, tools, cooking equipment, okay? So you got what I'm talking about here. All right, so when you get back to that risk equation I showed at, you have a choice between hazard versus risk. So if you look at managing risk, which is basically saying is, we got to make sure that carbon monoxide doesn't kill us. So in managing risk, we've put chimneys on our homes. So we've taken that gas from our furnaces and vented it out on top of our house, well aware from where we live. In fact, not only that, in our homes, it's a requirement, at least in this part of the world, to have smoke detectors outside of every bedroom, on every floor. And they have to be wired just to prevent it. So you can see where we've put it. Tailpipes on your cars, you're not having the fumes come in there. That's why when your car goes through inspection, they look at your muffler system, your exhaust system, to make sure that gas isn't leaking up in the driver's compartment. So we're still able to use our cars, we're still able to heat our homes, and we've managed risk with a reduced number of carbon monoxide poisonings. But if we wanted to be hazard and really eliminate any chance of carbon monoxide poisoning, we would ban cars. And we would ban heaters. And we would ban tools and other items that produce carbon monoxide. And what would that lead to is a much different way of life. So, I hope I put this in perspective that you can see where I'm going with this one. We'll get back to this Mr. Happy Bee. And, our regulatory authorities and a lot of people are suggesting we take this hazard approach. We banned all pesticides so we don't hurt the bees. But pesticides, whether they be chemical or bios, have a very significant place in agriculture. Remember that cabbage up front, my first slide, with all the holes? You ban pesticides, that's what your cabbage is going to look like. So we have to not follow through with the general consent to ban everything, but we have to look at what can we do to manage risk, to keep the bee kills down. And lo and behold, when you start talking to the scientists that spend their life doing studies, they're saying it's not these neonicotinoids that are killing these bees. It's viruses that are infecting the hives. It's mites that are infecting the hives. It is how the beekeepers are treating their bees when they're throwing them in trucks and dragging them from Florida to California to Washington. And by the way, they're being fed high fructose corn syrup. These are some of the factors that are killing these bees. But, the public emotion is saying is we got to ban neonicotinoid pesticides. So I'm urging you, if anything, is just don't always believe everything you read on Facebook, because it's not always true. And don't let the emotion of the moment catch over. Okay, so now let's move on to food waste, okay? So, food waste comes in many different forms, and I'm going to focus on one different area, but before I get into that, I want to just throw a little factoids for you. 40% of the food supply is never eaten. And by the way, this is a slide that was loaned to me by CropLife America. 40% of the food supply is never eaten. 40% never made it to the table. 80 billion pounds a year are lost. This ends up in the landfill. 20% of this 80 billion pounds ends up in the landfill. If we just reduced food waste by 15%, we could feed 25 million hungry people. Think about what's a reduction of 15%. It's not much. And think of where that could go for that one. So it's amazing. And then just to think about the inputs that go into agriculture, between fertilizer, water, energy, so much of this is going to waste that could be used elsewhere. So, just seeing how much of this is going down the tubes and not being able to be utilized, it's incomprehensible. So, this industry knows a lot about food waste. And, there's a lot of companies out there that have really stepped up their game over the last couple of years and really have tackled food waste, both at the wholesaler, the retail end, even consumer. So, I'm not plowing new ground here to use an agriculture term. This isn't new. People are stepping up and doing the right thing to reduce food waste. But this is the chain of the food waste. And just look at this area. Well, obviously, the most important one is if you can prevent at the source, you've come a long way. Preventing the food waste. And then the next step is to donate the surplus food for human consumption. So, seeing maybe some of this produce here that's going to go into the food banks tomorrow, or, the City Harvest is a group, if you're not local, City Harvest is an organization in the New York City area that tries to take food that would be discarded and make sure it gets into hungry people. I believe a lot of this food is going to go to City Harvest, but donating the surplus food. I actually had a conversation yesterday with a vegetable farmer down in North Carolina, and we were talking about this whole food waste issue, and he said, I would love to do something about this one, but from economically, it's very difficult for me to justify trying to do something about this one. So what he's done is opened his fields to a crew of gleaners, that when he's done collecting his produce, a crew will come in there and they will take whatever they can, harvest it. It's not costing the farmer anything. And then they're taking that food back to the food banks and feeding hungry people. Great idea. Recycle the food waste. Recycle it back into the fields, or recycle it to recover energy. Feed power plants, or use it as animal feed. Just make sure that that food is being used for something. Waste to energy, and then worst case, it goes to the landfill. So like I said, this is not plowing new ground here. You've heard food waste before, but what's interesting here is talking about some market opportunities. And this is where, maybe looking at where can we think out of the box a little bit more. And, some people have been doing this one. My wife grew up in upstate New York, and a lot of Irish immigrants up in this area where she grew up in. And one of the things that the very poor people that were up there used to do is go glean the potato fields after the farmers were done. And they had those little tiny potatoes, the ones maybe as big as a $50. And they would walk through those fields and pick those up, and they would take them back and throw them in some boiling water, as Irish people like to do, throw some salt and open themselves a beer or two. And but they call those salt potatoes. Has anyone ever heard of that term, salt potatoes? So you're from upstate New York if you heard that one. So they call those salt potatoes. And guess what? They took that waste product that a farmer would not grow, now someone's marketing those. And you can go down to, at least in this area, to the local grocery store, and you can buy a 5-pound bag of these tiny, basically cold potatoes with a little package of salt and thrown in there, and they're getting about, I think, probably about a, $1.50 for a 5-pound bag of potatoes. Someone's turned that lemon into lemonade and really made a good idea, and it's marketed and it's turned out real well. You have the Bolivian farms, the odd bells. So when you think of a bell pepper, right, you think of the nice 4 lobes on the bottom of the pepper, sits up like a square pepper. Well, they were finding out, well, not all those peppers were that quality. So they started looking at these odd bells, and guess what? They started to see that, you market it right, people will buy these things. And you start selling these things, and lo and behold, you've taken something that would have been a waste or very limited return on investment, and now you're getting a premium return on investment. The ugly produce move, the apples that have some blemishes. Up to now, they've always been discounted. You're starting to see some retailers open up the ugly produce section where they're selling it at a reduced price, but they're starting to get a return for this produce. It's not just going to waste, it's going for human consumption. And people that have lower economic thresholds are able to have access to quality fruits and vegetables. But again, maybe you can turn this ugly fruit into premium price. You used to see certain like asparagus that may be raw, off color. Well, maybe you could market yellow or white or yellow asparagus. Great idea. So there are market opportunities and to start looking at. But I really want to just move on there is when you start thinking about fruits and vegetables, okay? Well, I gave you a quote before about 40% of produce goes to food waste. Fruits and vegetables, it's a little bit higher. And not only is it higher, but 48% of the loss in fruits and vegetables occurs in the production phase. And that's where I'm saying is, where we can find the low-hanging fruit, again, to use another horticultural analogy, is there's opportunities to reduce that 40%, 48%. There's opportunities to really cut down on food waste to make sure that as much as possible the quality produce enters the market and we can feed these 10 billion people. So it's just not me coming out and bringing this out. This last year, I think it was about March or April, the House of Representatives had some hearings on agriculture food waste. And in this case there, John Oxford, who was at that point chairman-elect of Produce Marketing Association, testified in front of this group. And he was focusing on the same thing that the message I'm trying to get out here is, you need this crop protection to reduce food waste because growers are dependent on crop protection, whether it is, again, chemical or biological, to protect their crops. And if they don't have that ability to protect these crops, produce waste is going to go up there. And his comment was really referring to some of the policies that were coming out of the Environmental Protection Agency at that point of trying to really make some decisions, again, based on emotion to get certain pesticide products off the market. And his comment was, as a producer, we are worried, quote unquote, as a producer, we are worried about some of the recent messaging from the Environmental Protection Agency and the direction the agency has gone in some instances. I hate to say it, but what EPA and upper ends of the regulatory people were admitting, they were regulating on the number of tweeter comments they receive, not regulated on science. We have to put a stop to that one. I'm going to let that go for a second. Okay. First of all, I'm losing my voice, and second of all, I'm not going to try to go over that one. But so anyways, so I'd like to end this up about, so you as an individual, you as a representative of an organization, you as a representative of the food community, what can you do? What can we all do? What must we all do to prevent this train wreck? Well, we really do have to help reduce the food waste situation. There are a lot of steps have been taken. There's a lot more that need to be taken. You know, we can tackle it at many different levels. You know, the technology that I'm hoping that we can tackle it on is, you know, convincing the public that don't automatically reject scientific solutions just because someone said it's not good. You know, be smart, be educated, you know, listen to both sides of the story, ask questions. As representatives of the food industry, we must be willing to take a stand and stand by good decisions, stand by our own risk assessment, and make decisions that are defendable, but just don't roll over because, you know, one non-government organization says that you should. Only when we do that one can we really tackle food waste to the utmost. I also like to urge you to support additional resources for food protection. It has been very, very sad how our government has supported agriculture research over the last 2 decades. At best, agriculture research funds have been reduced. Been stayed flat. At worst, they've been significantly reduced. We've lost our infrastructure. We've lost our ability to do research to answer these problems. When we have these major problems pop up there, we don't have trained scientists to go out and tackle the issues because we've gone through there. At the same time, and I'm not saying it's a bad situation, but medical research increases. Research in other areas continue to grow, but research in agriculture has dropped. No, I can understand why when you see the bountiful harvest that we produce. But when you look at the challenges, you have to recognize that just because it's good today doesn't mean it's going to be the same tomorrow. Along these lines, one of the undersecretaries of the Department of Agriculture, actually he's director of the National Institute of Food and Agriculture, Sunny Ramaswamy, has put an expert panel together. We're going to be meeting in early January. What the goal is to come out with the new administration to double agriculture research in the next 5 years. So hopefully this will make it through, but we have a long way to go. So with that, I'm going to Claire tells me my time is coming towards the end. Thank you, Claire. So that I'm going to save some time for some questions. I think I have 5 minutes or so. So thank you very much, and I try to answer your questions as best as possible.
Fascinating presentation, Dr. Barron. Thank you.
Thank you.
So maybe before we ask Dr. Barron a question, I want to ask a question of the audience. I believe in one of your slides you talked about food waste. 40% of the food supply doesn't reach the table. It's not eaten. Who in the audience was surprised by that number? Anybody? You don't believe it? Too high, too low?
Go ahead.
That was a Food and Agriculture Organization statistics.
Correct.
That would be worldwide.
Globally, yes.
And those are the people who told us in 1960 that by 1990 we'd be 5 billion people and hundreds of millions of people would be starving.
Yeah.
and we're past that.
Yeah.
We're not starving. We're obese. Yet, you know, I
Yeah.
mean, the deal
Oh.
is, what would you think the real number on a worldwide basis? Maybe not the developed world, but worldwide basis.
I don't have any leg to stand on to argue with their number because I'm not an expert in that area, so I'm not going to dispute it. I will say, you know, they made these comments. You know, they were preaching the train wreck back then. What has happened? I mean, there's been a lot of technology changes that have increased yields of certain crops. So, you know, if you were to go back and say, if we were using the technologies of the 1950s now, would their estimations been right? Maybe. You know, I think we have to look at what has saved us. The Green Revolution, you know, some of the technologies that have come out has helped.
Regardless of the number, it is an interesting challenge and one that needs to be faced.
Right.
So with that, questions from the audience for Dr. Barron?
Hello. I just have a quick question about the work with GMOs and pesticides. I'm trying to figure out why you think it has been vilified and why there's this gap between science and emotion that you talk about.
Oh, do you want me to give the politically correct answer or the answer from my gut?
Oh, gut answer.
Okay. All right. So, and apologies if there's a member of the environmental working group in this audience, or many of the other NGOs. These are corporations, and don't let it fool you. There are corporations. They have staffs of hundreds. The high-level people are being paid at salaries that may rival some of the major corporations. We're not talking Donald Trump level here or Boeing, but you know, they're high-paid people. They're there, and one of the ways that they make their money and keep their business model going is to put fear in people. Now, I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm just saying is their way of doing business of scaring people and vilifying this technology plays into the increase in membership and the increase in donations. You know, good case in point. Claire, you're from Europe, right? There's a much different attitude about genetically modified crops in Europe than there is in the United States. We have that. I mean, if you're eating a burrito shell or you're eating bread, unless you're going out and buying organic there, you're eating genetically modified food. They're not over in Europe because they don't want it. Is there any statistical differences between certain diseases, what are called? I don't think so. We're all, and a lot of us are obese, but there's a lot of different reasons why we're obese, and it's not through genetically modified crops. Oh. Clary, I don't know if you may tell a word or two of what's going on in Europe about, you know, the politics there.
I'm probably going to look at my colleague Amy, who might be able to talk about that. Yeah.
I suppose just really briefly in the UK, for example, well in Europe, there's no GMOs approved apart from GMOs going. There's one going into cattle feed, and that's it. So yeah, spot on.
Yeah. And by the way, one of the first GMOs was actually marketed in Europe, the Flavor Saver tomato.
Well, it will be interesting going forward with examples like the CRISPR apple.
Yeah.
Actually, if there will be products coming into the market that actually are theoretically genetically modified but not actually labeled as
Right.
GMOs, I think that will be an interesting challenge for the future.
Yes. Thank you.
Other questions?
We hear typically from plant breeders which is a very long process, that one of the things that have ruined research in American universities has been the grant program, which basically demands results in a 3 to 5 year horizon, and if you're not going to get a result quick, you don't take on the research, and that simply our grant writing process is a reason that we're kind of going out. Do you see any light on the horizon that we might go back to where we were back in the day?
Oh, I wish. I like to sit down and have about 3 beers with you, explain some of my frustrations about the grant process. It's terrible. And not only that is you're having to prostitute yourself for money because, you know, there's a pot of money out there that says we will fund this type of research, and that may not be where you want to go, but because you've built up a team, you have to go out there and do it. Maybe let me just back up a second to explain it a little bit more, is there was 2 types of funding in the agriculture area. One was grant funding, which was, you know, you put a proposal out there and the best ones got funded, and the other one was a consistent source of funds that would pay for people to do work like extension. And over the years, the money for year in, year out, long-term research just keeps dwindling and dwindling and dwindling away, and everything has gone to the grant area. So it's not a good situation at all. And no, I don't see it changing, unfortunately.
One last question, anybody? Well, with that, let's show our appreciation once more for Dr. Barron. Thank you.
Thank you.